that is specifically designed to address unsheltered homelessness, sometimes known as street homelessness or homeless encampments, as well as homelessness in rural areas. So I'm going to maybe just go through a few slides that just talks through what we know about unsheltered homelessness, how we think about it, and what our new initiative entails. So let me give me a moment to share my screen. So, just to kind of level set, HUD defines unsheltered homelessness. Well, let me say this. HUD actually defines homelessness in terms of a first category as really three different subgroups. The first are people who are unsheltered. That means that they're sleeping. They have a primary nighttime residence that's a public place or a private place that's not meant for human habitation. That could be literally on the sidewalk or the streets. It could be in parks. It could be in vehicles, or I think more so these days, it means people who are in encampment settings. And then, of course, people who are in sheltered settings, we consider homeless, as well as people who are leaving an institution where they have been there less than 90 days. Over the last really 10 years, we've seen unsheltered homelessness decrease. And then over the last, I say 5 or so years, we've seen unsheltered homelessness increase. The chart on the left shows out of overall homelessness, more people are in shelters based on our point in time counts than are in unsheltered settings. But you could see that sheltered homelessness has kind of steadily declined, but unsheltered homelessness really starting around 2016 started to rise. Among individuals that are not part of families, so this is individuals who are not a couple or with children, what we see is that now the number of individuals who are sleeping in unsheltered settings actually has passed the number and is higher than the number of people who are sleeping in sheltered settings, and that's a major concern. We also know like a majority of people who are unsheltered, according to our data, are individuals. About 93% are individuals. Only 7% are families with children, but that's still quite a number of children on the streets. And then we see that majority of people who are unsheltered don't meet the chronic homelessness status. And so they, as a lot of efforts have been focused on chronic homelessness, people who are unsheltered may or may not be being assisted in that, according to that definition. We don't have the best data nationally on health conditions, but the California Policy Lab has done some data analysis looking at local data. And what they found is actually fairly unfortunate, which is that while there are high health conditions among all people who are homeless, people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness really have health needs that are much more significant. That includes physical health conditions, mental health conditions, substance use disorders, and like half of people who are unsheltered, according to this data, are trimorbid, meaning they actually have all three of those conditions: physical, mental health, and substance use disorders. And then I think most folks think about unsheltered homelessness as being an urban problem, but actually what our data shows is that if you look at major cities compared to other kind of smaller cities or suburban communities, rural communities actually have even a higher percentage of people who are unsheltered than in sheltered settings. And some of you may be already sort of familiar with that dynamic. One of the interesting kind of dynamics is that there was a survey of mayors that Boston University conducted. And with the rise in homeless encampments, I think almost every mayor in America would probably say that homelessness is now one of their top concerns, if not their very top concern. Certainly mayors of bigger cities will say that. 73% of the mayors who were surveyed said that they feel like they're held accountable by the public for homelessness, and probably as it should be. But only 19% feel like they have any control over how to address homelessness. They don't actually oversee homeless services in most places, and most of them don't feel like they understand what tools they have to address homelessness. And therefore, I think a lot of them feel like the only way they can respond is through police and law enforcement or public works. And I think a lot of mayors have not felt educated about how they can actually provide leadership in addressing homelessness in productive ways. We've seen that shift over the last year or so, we've recruited mayors and county leaders and governors through our House America initiative. We've been helping to identify mayors who want to kind of pledge to us that they want to use a housing first approach to address homelessness. But I think most of you probably are familiar that I think a couple of years ago, most mayors were not necessarily fully knowledgeable about what they could do to address homelessness in effective ways. We've seen some promising developments over the last year or so. In Boston, the new mayor there, she actually pledged when she was elected to take a public health approach to addressing Boston's encampment, which has now been resolved. While there's still people outside and who need help, there are no more people sleeping outside, and they've actually opened up a number of non-congregate, low-threshold shelters, moving people to permanent housing. Houston received some attention recently in the New York Times. They've actually moved 25,000 people out of homelessness into permanent homes, and a lot of their approach is really about increasing outreach and then kind of rapid connections to housing, often directly from the streets without necessarily shelters. So HUD, and this is, maybe I won't go explain exactly how we were able to do this, but we had some unspent recaptured funds through the continuum of care that accumulated over the last few years. And in 2018, Congress gave us, normally when we recapture funds, we have to send that money back, and that goes back into and we sort of lose that for homelessness. But Congress gave us the authority to actually redirect any funds that were recaptured from the continuums of care to actually put it out through a special NOFA and to focus on areas of high concern to the secretary, along with a set aside for rural communities. And then in the federal fiscal year 21, Congress also gave us 4,000 vouchers, housing choice vouchers that could address homelessness. We made the decision at HUD that given that unsheltered homelessness is increasing, communities are struggling with how to do this. And again, we've been seeing this disturbing trend of growing calls to criminalize homelessness. We specifically said we want to use these funds to help communities develop comprehensive approaches using housing first, using public health approaches to solve unsheltered homelessness. So we put out a NOFA a couple of weeks ago that provides $322 million on a competitive basis to communities. And in addition, in a few weeks, we'll be issuing a notice that indicates how those communities will be prioritized to receive these housing choice vouchers as well. So it's a combination of grant dollars and vouchers. Out of the $322 million, $54.5 million will be set aside for rural communities. What we're hoping to see in community responses is a set of system level elements as well as program components. First and foremost, we're asking communities to articulate, just explain to us how they're using a comprehensive approach to address unsheltered or rural homelessness. And what we want to see is that they're advancing best practices, housing first approaches, harm reduction, intentional outreach, how they're streamlining the delivery of assistance. So they're cutting through red tape, reducing documentation burden. They're finding ways to overcome some of those kind of challenges. I think really important is to really listen to and engage people who have lived experience of homelessness to really provide their expertise. We want to see how they're advancing equity and addressing racial disparities, as well as the disparities of people with disabilities, and then using local data to measure outcomes and continually improve their performance. And then with regard to the grant funds, what we want communities to do is identify when you look at homeless outreach, access to healthcare and services, low threshold shelter, housing, permanent housing and connections to permanent housing, as well as leveraging vouchers, public housing, other affordable housing, we're allowing communities to sort of use the grant funds to fill in gaps in that system, but we want them to explain to us how they're advancing this through a comprehensive approach. So we released the NOFA earlier this month. It will be open until October 12th, I believe, or I may have that wrong. It was sometime mid-October. And then we'll be making probably awards like early 2023. So it'll be a little bit of a while before we make these awards. And then again, we'll be putting out a notice that explains that what we're trying to do is have the communities who win these grant awards, and we're estimating somewhere between 20 to 30 communities, depending on how large they are, will receive these awards. We'll also be able to allocate the 4,000 vouchers to those communities. So just leaving with you a few more links, and then I will stop sharing my screen so we can engage in a conversation.
Richard, thank you so much. I do have a couple of people who had some questions for you right off the bat. I'm going to call on Lori Pampillo Harris. Lori, you want to ask the questions that you have?
Sure. Richard, thanks for joining us. One of the questions that we had as an organization is how specifically did HUD engage with people with lived expertise in developing the NOFA? Because this will be directly impacting them and is intended to support their pathway to housing.
Yeah, we actually, thank you for that question, Lori. We held, I think it was 2 or maybe 3 listening sessions with people with lived experience. And Donald, I believe we worked with you to help just get the word out for that. So, and we held those in kind of different hours, but in the evenings, knowing that a lot of people are out working during the day. So we did it through Zoom, and we really asked folks to, and at the time we weren't allowed to explain that it was because we were designing a NOFA, because we're not allowed to forecast that. But what we did say was that we want to know from people with lived experience what are the kind of things that they think would be helpful. And so we absolutely had, I believe, again, memory is a little fuzzy, but I think at least 2, if not 3, separate listening sessions with people with lived experience.
If my memory serves me right, there were 3 different sessions and different population segments during those sessions. Lori, you had additional questions?
Yeah, thanks for allowing us to ask a couple more questions here, Richard and Donald. So with the rural set aside, we know that that is also helping to support and amplify the needs in Indian country. So how have tribal nations and TDHEs been able to participate in being a part of the NOFA? How is HUD helping through either TA or helping with collaborative engagement with tribal leaders so that they know how to participate in this great opportunity? Was there a Dear Tribal letter? Was it posted on Code Talk? And has there been any tribal consultation prior to the NOFA being released?
Yeah, so our office has coordinated with our Office of Native American Programs to get the word out to tribal nations. We're not allowed to sort of provide technical assistance to communities on how to respond to our own NOFOs, because that actually, there's specific laws that prevent us from providing TA, because we need to run a fair competition. But we did make it clear that actually very recently HUD received authority to allow tribal nations and tribally designated housing entities to receive grants under our continuum of care, both through this special NOFA, but also as part of our annual continuum of care NOFA process. And so they have to do that as part of a collaborative applicant, meaning if you're a tribal nation, you have to identify which COCs you will apply through, which is not perfect, but that is essentially how Congress provided us the authority to do that. So, but we have worked to try to get the word out through our ONAP office.
Great.
So, Lori, did you have additional, or I see 4 other hands as
yeah,
well?
Just one really quick one. And I think this is important
5 hands,
for this audience. So in previous webinars, HUD stated that involving individuals with lived experience of homelessness and decision-making must be in the COC plan. I have read this, but I think it would be good for you to articulate, how is that verified and how will it be monitored? So even if I know there's supposed to be a letter and people are supposed to sign off, but there's going to be benchmarks of monitoring that people with lived experience and those who are currently homeless are a part of the implementation of the strategy?
So obviously we don't always have the ability to reach down and visually monitor or visit, but because this is a special NOFO, because we'll be selecting a smaller number of communities. We are, first of all, looking through the applications. We want to see a kind of meaningful way that people with lived experience will actually be engaged. So if we read things that are like, don't feel like it's actually really well thought out, that will factor into our scoring. And then I would say we intend to provide pretty significant technical assistance to the communities that are selected here. And that will enable us to really not only monitor really actually, but actually help build sort of share lessons across communities to really strongly encourage communities to have meaningful sort of ways to engage people with lived experience, whether that's like building that into their governance or having sort of action boards that are kind of standing with people with lived experience. So we are going to be very involved with the communities that receive these grants to address unsheltered and rural homelessness. And that's one way that we'll be able to ensure that that's happening in a meaningful fashion.
Thank you so much, Lori, and thank you, Richard, for being so responsive. I have a pretty full lineup of people with questions at this point. I'm going to try to keep them in order to the best of my ability. I think Nikki Stevens, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, Nikki Stevens with Maricopa County in Arizona. As HUD has talked about, people of color, specifically Black and Native American populations, Indigenous in our community are overrepresented. How is HUD looking at outcomes to see if we can really make a dent in reducing, homelessness for those populations that are historically marginalized?
I mean, it's an ongoing thing where we're doing our part to sort of learn better. First and foremost, we want communities, and certainly we'll be looking at this at a national level, but we want communities to really look closely at their data to understand the racial disparities in the homeless population, particularly relative to their overall populations. And then second, to look at how is our homeless services being delivered and is that contributing to racial disparities? So that's the second part. And, it could be looking at how coordinated entry systems are working. It could be looking at who is receiving which interventions. For example, if you see more Black and brown people who are returning to homelessness after receiving rapid rehousing or other housing assistance, is there, is something going on with your coordinated entry system that's leading to that recidivism rate? And then we're also hoping to help communities to understand how to, because I think one of the biggest ways that racial disparities occur is not always about how homeless services and assistance is provided, but actually who comes to the homeless system in the first place, and to start looking upstream and understanding, like, why is that happening? Is there higher rates of discharge from jails or hospital systems or psychiatric hospitals that are leaving more Black and brown people to experience homelessness? But I'm going to say, Nikki, we don't have all the answers. This is something we have prioritized. HUD actually developed an equity action plan. And in it, what we're committing to do is to engage in a process with communities to help understand better what we can do to work on reversing these racial disparities. But as you know, it is a top concern for Secretary Fudge, and it is a top concern for the president as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. There was a question about the slides. Will they be available after the meeting?
Yeah, Donald, I can send you those slides and you can feel free to share those.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to get back because we still have quite a few people with questions. Gwen is next. Gwen, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Gwen Cassidy, and I'm the Executive Director of Managing Love, which has a program which is my Harvard capstone called International Villas. And we're starting here in Charlottesville, Virginia with Seaville Villas. Everybody has told me that I need to reach out to HUD, but I don't know where to start. So I guess my question is, it's the first intentional net positive small home community for currently homeless female vets, as well as teenagers aging out of the foster care system, domestic violence survivors, and an Airbnb for sustainable revenue. And my question to you today, Richard, is where do I start? Who do I reach out to specifically? Where do I begin the process?
I think we have a no wrong door answer to that, but Gwen, absolutely reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat, and so you can actually email me directly.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that a lot. And thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Gwen. Thank you for your work in the community as well. Joel Siegel is next.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Donald. I'm Joel Siegel, National Director of the Bring America Home Now campaign with National Coalition for the Homeless. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Cho, and this is citizen democracy at its highest. First question is, how would 500,000 or 1 million vouchers help rural homelessness? There's a bill in Congress that Maxine Waters has introduced, the Ending Homeless Bill. In your opinion, how far would that go? And number two, if there was billions of dollars in CDBG and home funds to rural areas, how would that also impact rural homelessness? Thank you.
Yeah, Joel, thank you. I probably won't comment on a bill in Congress per se, but I will say more vouchers is always better. And what we've seen, and actually there was a news story that came out yesterday about the new emergency housing vouchers that HUD awarded. And what we're seeing is that of any voucher program that we've created in the past, whether that's HUD VASH or other mainstream vouchers or other vouchers, these emergency housing vouchers are getting taken up at a faster rate than any other voucher program that HUD's ever administered. So it just shows how not only is there a need, but also that communities were really ready to make referrals, both from the homeless service organizations through COCs, but also through victim service providers as well. So like more vouchers, keep bringing them. Congress gives; they're the ones who fund the vouchers. We administer them. So we'll take more vouchers. And I'll say in FY 23, the president asked Congress through the budget to provide 200,000 additional vouchers, including to address homelessness as well as domestic and other gender-based violence and human trafficking. So we are prioritizing that. In rural communities, we see it's not only an issue about rental assistance, but sometimes it's also about housing stock. And so it needs to be coupled with the housing supply strategy. That's not just true in rural areas, but everywhere. One of the things we did in this special NOFA, but with regard to the rural portion of the grants, is we're allowing communities up to a cap to use some of the grant funds to make repairs to existing housing stock. We know that in a lot of rural areas and tribal communities, there may be housing, but it needs significant repairs. So we're allowing some of the grants, which we don't typically do this through the continuum of care, but we're allowing those grants to also make repairs so that we can actually increase the amount of stock of housing as well. But more resources to both increase housing supply as well as to make housing more affordable, Joel, always welcome and better from this administration's perspective.
Thank you so much.
Richard, thank you so much. And I thank all of you for your questions. I would ask, and I just put this in the chat, if we could try to make sure that we stick to questions about the NOFA, if you will, to the best of our ability. Richard, can you promise us you'll come back for general questions later? And we'll do that. Richard is pretty gracious with his time. So to the best of our ability, let's try to get as much as we can information-wise about the NOFA as we continue. So the next person I have on the list is Renee.
I'm on mute. Okay, y'all can hear me. Let me come on camera.
Renee, we're having a little problem with your audio.
Thank
you
you
work on
for
that.
being here. It's just one question I want to ask you. Okay, my name is Renee Mitchell, and I have a nonprofit in New York City. Okay, hold on a minute. Y'all can y'all hear me?
Yes, Renee.
Now we can.
It's a little
Okay, y'all can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, Richard. My name is Renee Mitchell, and I'm the CEO of Breaking the Cycle Drive Corp in New York City. Okay, I'm a person with lived experience, and I also help the unsheltered homeless. And the only question I have to ask you is that in the past, I tried to allocate funds through HUD, okay, like CDBG grants, and they said that I could not do it because I had to be connected with DHS, DSS. So are we going to be able to go directly to HUD to apply for these grants, or we have to go through an agency?
Good question.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
so-
much, Renee.
Yeah, so Renee, the reason why you were probably told to go through DHS is because they, I think in New York City, DHS is the lead collaborative applicant for the New York City Continuum of Care. By kind of laws, HUD's Continuum of Care funding has to go to the designated collaborative applicants for each Continuum of Care. As you all know, there's like 390 separate continuums of care. And so, and I can share a link in the chat to how to find your collaborative applicant, but our grants have to go through a community-wide application, but where if you want to fund a specific project, you have to propose that through your local Continuum of Care collaborative applicant. And so
Okay, well, Richard, hold on, Richard. I think that
Renee,
the narrative should be changed there because we have people with vouchers in New York City that they just have vouchers. They're there 2 and 3 years in shelters. Okay, no house. Okay, then the shelter system is a massive system failure in New York all around the board. I have homeless that I deal with every day in garbage, in the trash, laid in the streets, okay, and nobody cares. Okay, my model is addressing the root cause and ending homeless through wraparound services.
so thank you for that, Renee. We're going to go on to another question. Our next person is Lou.
Good morning, everybody. Richard, actually, we have talked on one of the meetings you conducted on the criminal records. So I'm glad that today we can see this particular NOFA established. However, you know, historically, outdoor or unsheltered population, homeless population has always been big. And this is the reason why I have 3 bullet points for you to consider. First of all, the pit count does not really give us the accurate number. And at the same time, your statistics still show the real thing that actually the outdoor or unsheltered homeless population has been increased. That's because your shelter system has been messed up. Lots of people stay in the shelter, they cannot take it, they have to be outdoor as well to join the chronically outdoor population. And the second point is, this particular NOFA does that support portabilities. Lots of times people getting a voucher, but right now it seems like they all emphasize on voucher and they forgot that, like what you said, the existing housing stock could also be revived, especially the public housing. We need a lot of fundings on that to help out. Voucher cannot solve all the problems. I'm sorry to tell you that. And the third point is, if this NOFA is only one-time deal, because I don't think our problem can be solved with just one-time money, one-time funding. We really need this NOFA also to be a regular thing in the mainstream, so the issues can be resolved altogether with other populations or other categories you already have on your agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lou.
Thanks, Lou. Good to see you again or hear from you again. Let me, three tough questions. So first, I think we know that the point in time count is just a single night count. So we never at HUD assume that the number of people in the pit actually represents the full universe of people who experience homelessness. We have another report that actually tracks the number of people who use homeless services over the course of the year. And that's a much bigger number. It's more like 1 million or so, more than 1 million people. But it doesn't include unsheltered folks. And the reason is because communities don't always track data on unsheltered populations through HMIS. One of the things we hope will actually come out of this special NOFA is that more communities will actually put data into HMIS on their unsheltered population so we can actually have year-round data on the unsheltered population. But so data is going to be a big part of what we're pushing for. I don't know what to say on your second question, Lou. I know vouchers aren't going to solve the whole thing, but vouchers help. It's probably one of the best tools we have to move people out of homelessness into housing, but we know it's got to be part of a broader solution that increase, if some of you remember when we were pushing for Build Back Better, and we hope Congress will do something in that space, we were looking for massive increases in our programs to build more housing, more vouchers, but also more resources across the board. So we know vouchers alone, it's not going to solve it, but vouchers are really important. The last thing you raised, if memory serves, was, remind me, Lou, what was the last thing that you?
Oh, actually, for the voucher part of it, the portability part of it, I was emphasizing maybe you should also help us to get a public housing, all those projects revived to go with the voucher, because the voucher cannot really solve everybody's problem. That was the voucher part I mentioned about the portability.
Right.
Because when people need to move from one tribe to another tribe, or from one rural area maybe to another rural area, the portability issue becomes a problem, because the other areas housing stock may not match either. In that case, that will not help the portability. That was the reason why I wish HUD can pay attention to portability of any kind of voucher HUD issues.
Yeah, that's something we can certainly address. Ruthie, I see your question in the chat. The other report is the AHAR Part 2, which we haven't put out in a few years because of some data changes, but that will be coming out soon. Lou, you had another point that, and I can't remember. Oh, about one-time funding.
Yes.
So you mentioned this is, so these, the grants we're providing, the 322 million in grants, those will be 3-year grants. And then after 3 years, they will be renewable through the regular annual competition. And I agree with you. We would love to be able to do more of these competitive unsheltered grants. It's the first time we're doing this. We don't necessarily have the money right now to be able to do this. We do anticipate having future recaptured funds, but it's not always clear that we will have the same amount of funds. But we don't think of this as a one-time thing. We're hoping that this is like, as some of you know, we have a youth homelessness demonstration program that started a few years ago. Congress gave us specific money for that. We've been able to expand that. We now have 75 communities that have youth homeless demonstration program grants. We will be at 100 with these new awards that we'll be making soon. Same kind of idea here. We started this with a new special NOFA. In the future, we hope to be able to expand it to more communities. But again, these are 3-year grants and then renewable after that through the regular annual.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
And the vouchers that we're allocating, those will be forever vouchers. Those are just, yeah.
Thank you very much, Richard. We have 7 more people. So if you could save your follow-up question for the chat, and please just ask one question if you could, just in the interest of time, making sure everybody gets a chance to speak. So the next person is Dr. Rajni Shankar Brown.
Thank you very much, Donald. And Richard, thank you so much for being here and making the space for this conversation and dialogue. So, I was curious also about the portability question that Lou brought up. I'm going to kind of reframe here. So something that is worrying me with the NOFA is, again, how things are being allocated, especially based on data, knowing that families and children and youth are severely underestimated in HUD's counts, the way the data is being presented at HUD. And this is being challenged, right, by anyone and everyone kind of directly working with families and youth, from early childhood programs and educators, our teachers in our public schools, saying this is far, far underestimated. And so I'm curious, are there conversations, knowing that the data is flawed and misleading, and that we have so many families, children, youth on our streets experiencing really layers of violence as well, to really emphasize, amplify the need to really address this, but also knowing that this is deeply connected to racial equity. So I saw a commitment, right, kind of on one of your slides shared, where racial equity is a big piece of this work, but it seems like this is kind of being missed, especially when you look at the overrepresentation of our families, our children and youth, who are Black and Brown communities, right? And you know, I just am curious what kinds of conversations are going on with the NOFO and this in particular.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. I mean, I guess this is a special NOFO. Let me maybe take a step back for a second. So as you know, we now have about $3 billion in homeless assistance grants at HUD. Most of that goes through our continuum of care. A smaller amount goes through our emergency solutions grant program. That ESG program is a block grant that we give out to communities. The COC is an annual grant competition. Over the last few years, Congress has increased homeless assistance grants, but earmarked the increases for two purposes. One is domestic violence or projects that, like a bonus project that actually funds additional housing and services for people fleeing domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, human trafficking. And then they've also given us specific earmarked money to expand our youth homelessness demonstration grant. The regular part of the continuum of care, most of that money ends up going to renew existing projects. We actually can set ways to incentivize communities to redirect some existing funds. But you know, it's not when communities think that HUD is sort of like picking different populations. Largely, that's because Congress is actually earmarking funds for specific purposes. This unsheltered NOFO is a place where, because we had money that we've recaptured from local communities, we specifically said we need to address a part of the homeless population that is not well been served, and that's the people who are sleeping on the streets, in encampments, in cars, as well as in rural communities. And so we're making that. But my point is, like, we want to be able to address the whole homeless population. And one of the things the Biden-Harris administration is prioritizing is to not pit populations against one another. We need to address family homelessness, youth homelessness, single adult homelessness, homelessness among people with disabilities, people who are in unsheltered settings. And we are doing our part to try to figure out, with the resources that Congress gives us, to be able to try to meet all of those needs. But we know it's not enough. And so that's where all of you can voice where you feel like the needs are, because that's how Congress makes decisions in a democracy.
Thanks, Richard. We're going to go to our next person, who is Anita Beatty. I don't see her on the call anymore, so we're going to skip her unless she's still there. And the next person is Maya. If you want to go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. So I have two quick questions. The first is just to clarify, Richard, on what you said earlier about the additional vouchers. Should we be expecting to be able to leverage those in our plan for the special NOFO? We as in the collaborative applicant. And then my second question is whether there's a deadline by which project applicants need to start their projects by. So for example, could we include a housing project that will not be complete until the fall of 2025? Thank you.
I can't answer some of those questions, Maya, just because with an open competition, I'm not allowed to answer specific things that can help any particular community just by the rules. So what I will say is this: you'll find out in a couple of weeks what's going on with the vouchers that we're issuing. I want to note that those vouchers must serve people who are experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness, fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking, or veterans who qualify under those other three categories. We're not expecting those vouchers are only going to serve people who are unsheltered, but the premise here is we want the COCs who are going to compete and apply for these grants to partner with their PHAs and ask their PHAs for more vouchers and resources, including vouchers, public housing. We want them to leverage those commitments. And then what our kind of thought is these 4,000 vouchers will then be allocated to enhance the community's overall pool of vouchers. That makes sort of sense. It's not like a one-to-one. Those vouchers must serve people who are coming off the streets. And then I can't really answer the question about that, but I will say we built in a planning period in the NOFO for the unsheltered portion, not for the rural, but for the unsheltered portion. So there will be a little bit of lead time, but I can't speak to the specific project you're speaking to.
Awesome. Richard, we still have, I think on my list, I have 5 more people. We'll go to William next. William, are you still there?
Yes, I am. Hi, I appreciate attending this meeting and you being present here. My name is William Norwood. I am CEO of an agency called the Diplomat Center. We work specifically to rehouse reentry clients, people coming out of the county and state prisons. I've also worked with the UDC and Ministry of Housing in Jamaica, which has a huge population of people living in unfit places. So there's some experience that I have in development. And my question is this, as long as HUD has been established, it seems like there's have not been proactive measures in place to prevent this. I see large developments in what they call these big cities. And these developments they're planning 20, 30 years ahead of time. And we don't even have enough housing stock, public housing. And we know that as a result of a big city, homelessness is just collateral damage. So why aren't we being more proactive? I mean, as a government entity.
That's a big question, William. Thank you for that. I will say that a few weeks ago, the Biden administration released our sort of our action plan for how we are trying to help increase housing supply in many forms, but with a particular focus on creating very low income, extremely low income housing. And so we're doing everything we can to help communities create the conditions that make it easier to build deeply affordable housing, whether that's examining their zoning, fighting NIMBYism, putting together resources. It's very complex to put together all the different funding streams that make it possible to make housing that's affordable to people with the lowest incomes. So we're working on providing a lot more technical assistance. All that's to say, like, we could do a lot more in this country if Congress could actually invest in more resources, and that's what we were hoping Build Back Better would do. And the administration certainly told Congress, like, here's what we are looking for in terms of increases across many different HUD programs, but also programs at Treasury to increase investments in affordable housing. I'll just say I'm very familiar with the fact that we're seeing a growing trend across the country for very for-profit minded folks really acquiring more properties and driving up rents, and we are working to try to counter that. Thank you, Lori, for sharing the link to our supply action plan. But it's definitely something, William, we're doing our part in the administration, and I hope we'll see Congress do their part as well.
Awesome. And we will have a copy of the chat as well. A lot of really important links and questions, and we are doing our best to get to all of them. Sue Watliff Phillips, you are next on the list of questionnaires.
Thanks, Donald, and thank you, Richard, so much for your presentation. And this is a historic moment for us to get these types of resources out to the communities. Really appreciate that people that experienced homelessness had some input initially in the design of it. I'm hoping that as you are reviewing applications, in addition to people signing off at the local community, that you also will have people that have experienced homelessness, possibly the HUD TA group of lived experience and expertise helping in reviewing the applications. Wanted to just again just highlight the importance of us having more flexible resources at the local level. And I think these are the types of resources that we need to have, and we need to have it for all populations. And so I think having it just limited to the point in time count really does limit our ability to really meet the families and youth that are also experiencing homelessness under the Department of Education definition. The question I do have is specifically around you connecting this NOFA with what was announced yesterday or has been worked on for a while at the White House, where Gene Sperling talked about the apprentice positions for people experiencing homelessness to get into the bipartisan infrastructure jobs that are going to be created. So wondering if there's going to be additional information that'll come out to communities from HUD, just encouraging people to get folks that are experiencing homelessness into apprentice jobs that they can then make livable incomes and get themselves out of homelessness permanently. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Sue. Lots there. I will say this, I keep hearing this thing about the point in time count, and I'll just say, like, we use a lot of different data to understand what's going on with homelessness. As I mentioned, we use a lot of, we also rely on the HMIS data that is reported to us. Again, that provides a different incomplete picture of homelessness because it represents everybody who uses shelters, transitional housing over the course of the year, not people who are on the streets. But that gives us data on not only who comes in and out of the homeless system every year, but also more data on their service needs. Again, we'll be releasing a report that captures 19 and 20 data sometime soon. Like I said, we are looking at trying to address homelessness for all folks. Families that are at risk of homelessness, according to HUD's definition, who may be in doubled up situations, they are eligible for vouchers. They're also eligible for the emergency housing vouchers because those allow people who are at risk of homelessness, according to our definition. And these new vouchers that we're allocating coupled with this unsheltered NOFA will as well. So I think those vouchers are kind of cool because they do give more flexibility. And then Sue, your last question
was around the apprentice program. And
that's a great thing, and I will make sure to follow up with our colleagues at Department of Labor on that. We've been partnering with labor on things, but I will definitely follow up, Sue, to try to see what we could do to make some stronger connections.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for that commitment. We have been advocating for that exact program for a very long time. We're going to take a little bit of credit for getting that across the board. So the next person is Calandria.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Richard. I am Calandria Ortiz Resende, Policy Coordinator at the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. And well, my question is, like, we know that what we are seeing here in New Jersey is that in many cases, survivors of domestic violence have hard time meeting the criteria, the qualification to access to funding for housing, and sometimes even for vouchers. And I want to ask if in some way at the federal level in HUD, they can work on guidance. So when COCs or any other department at the local state level work with those funding, they have to apply those guidelines that doesn't re-traumatize people who are facing this difficult situation, like some domestic violence, for instance, in one hand, and also homelessness. So so they can access to those resources without having to add more trauma to their position. Like, it's hard for many people to reach the income level, immigration status, credit, and there is a certain list of qualifications that sometimes prevent them to access. So I was wondering if HUD is looking into that to ease the way so people can actually reach the funding available for them. One thing is to have the funding and the $3 billion, and then it's like people accessing them in real life.
Yeah, thank you, Calandria, for that question. I'm going to put in the chat. We've actually developed quite a bit of guidance on how continuums of care must work with victim services providers, how they must coordinate with them, include them as part of COCs, protect confidentiality, create comparable databases, not require people to have to be re-traumatized through assessments. All of that has been in our guidance, but I've been learning very recently that that's not very well known. So I'm going to put the link in the chat, but one of the things we will be working on is to try to just ensure that we're doing more technical assistance around some of that. I also say that with the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, there were a number of provisions in VAWA that we'll be needing to make some regulations and some guidance changes on that include language changes. So there'll be more coming on that front. But Calandria, thank you for that question, and I'll put the guidance that we have up to date in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. We have, Richard, I think we have really gone through the gamut here, and we have 2 more people left. I think that's pretty amazing. So if you guys could be as quick as possible. Marigold, you're next, and then we have Ruth White for our final question. So Marigold.
Thank you so much, Donald. Thank you, Richard, for a very comprehensive information. One of my questions was, we have been doing work helping the homeless and individuals in crisis, women in crisis in our actual shelter for many, many years. And the challenge that we have for HUD grants and different grants like this is, how do the little people actually get in on these grants? I mean, realistically, yes, I've heard you speak about the COC. We are in touch with our COC, but how do we actually break into that? We have, all of our staff is unpaid, and we have been doing this work for years and doing good work. So how do we break in to get these kinds of grants? My next question, well, it's just a follow-up question, that we actually have a program where we are wanting to build affordable housing. How do we do that through HUD? Is it through their contracts? What is the mechanism? I'd love to know that. And I have lived the experience of domestic violence and also, you know, being homeless. So I know where I'm coming from on this. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you, Marigold. I think I heard the question right. My volume was a little on the low side, but with regard to sort of being more involved in the continuums of care, I mean, I think we'll be doing a lot more to try to incentivize, encourage continuums of care to be inclusive, not to not exclude organizations. So really expand that. We're also going to be focusing on making sure that continuums of care are their members and the people who are part of the COCs are more reflective of the people who they're serving. And so we want to see greater diversity, equity, and inclusion within the COC membership. So that's going to be something we're going to be doing through, you'll see that sort of consistently across our various NOFOs to try to encourage some of that. And that, that includes organizations that serve people fleeing domestic violence or other intimate partner violence as well.
Thank you, Richard. We have one more questioner, and that would be Ruth White. She has put a couple of her questions in the chat and has promised to email you for others. But Ruth, if you want to ask the last question before we allow everybody to get on with their day.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to know if those 2 data points are available. So I'd like to know if we can view the map or the chart that shows how the recaptures were made and where they were made from. And then, so that's one separate piece of data. The other data is the breakdown of the emergency housing vouchers and how many of those vouchers went to households with children and how many of the vouchers went to households without children.
On number 1, I don't know where that is. We don't have a chart on that. I think it's money that's been recaptured over the last few fiscal years, and that could be for a variety of reasons, whether a project closed or never took off or something else happened. But I'll find out if that information, it's all publicly available, but I don't know that we have that sort of in some kind of ready form. With regard to the emergency housing vouchers, I don't know that we publish that in the publicly facing dashboards. As some of you know, we have been very transparent with all of our voucher programs. So we've created dashboards. We have a separate dashboard on EHVs that I don't think it actually tells you the household composition size, but that is something that we do collect. But again, I'll have to find out like how easy is it to compile that information, Ruth.
Well, Richard, thank you so much. We got through every person who wanted to ask a question. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you for great questions. Richard, thank you for this opportunity to really dive into the new NOFA. And thank you for getting that through HUD. And we hope that you'll come back for some more general conversation with us. And thank you for your partnership. And I, again, thank all of you for joining us. That's going to be the end of our session today. So please continue to question the things that you see as impediments to people being able to get through the issue of homelessness. And thank you all for being advocates in your community. Have a great day.